Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Wealth Conversation podcast with me, Tsitsi Mutiti. I guide high-achieving women on their journey to build lasting wealth so they can prepare for an abundant future in every area of their life. I hope that today's episode will help you to transform your relationship with money so you can make the choices that will enable you to create the opportunities and lasting wealth that you desire. Let's get straight into this week's episode. Research shows that parents and carers have the most influence on how we deal with money in adult life. And I believe that teaching children about money helps them manage their own finances as they get older. That is why in this episode, I'll be chatting with Funmi Olufunwa, who is on a mission to fill the financial education gap and get children and adults talking confidently about money. Welcome, Funmi, to the Wealth Conversation podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Oh, fantastic. Let's get straight into it. So please share a bit more about yourself and your background.
Okay, so I'm one of four. So I have three other siblings. We grew up in Windsor, which sounds fancy, but it wasn't really very what I would class as very normal upbringing with my mum and my dad. My dad was a doctor who worked full time, and my mum was a chartered secretary who worked part time, mostly around us kids. I love being part of a big family. And before I had my daughter, I thought, I want to have four children too, because it's so great. And then I had one, and that's currently being revised. That's no longer the goal of four children at the moment. I guess then from a professional perspective, in terms of what I do, I'm a lawyer. I'm also a financial coach and educator. So I started law in 2003 and really kind of only left it this summer, just gone by. I'm still technically a lawyer, but I'm just not practicing because I started my financial coaching and education business. So I trained to be a financial coach last June. So kind of like just after lockdown, I kind of got going. Absolutely loved it. And it's taken me a little bit of time to kind of leave the law to one side and embark on this new venture. So like I said, I was a lawyer for about 18 or so years. The past 13 years were in financial services. So I've kind of worked around and been involved with financial products for quite a long time now. I started off working in a law firm, and then I went from working in law firms to working in in-house teams, in-house legal teams in banks and other financial services institutions. And my last role was in a fintech startup company. Along the way, I've had a couple of moments of, is this still what I want to do? So I had a little bit of a break where I explored teaching as a possible alternative career. So I spent some time volunteering in schools, primary schools and secondary schools. And I was actually going to apply there's a program called Teach First, where you go in and you learn to be a teacher and you're trained on the job. And I was going to apply for that. And then I actually got sent on secondment to a bank and actually really enjoyed that secondment and ended up leaving the law firm that I was at to go and work in that bank. So I kind of had a bit of a foray into thinking I might want to do teaching. And then a few years later, I thought again, and I thought about, maybe I want to work in music management. So I've also done a music management business course as well. Tried to get into that, which was quite tough because I guess on paper, it looked quite odd. I was a lawyer in financial services and then suddenly I wanted to intern at a record company. So I didn't get very far with that. So I've tried a few things to try and escape from the law. But yeah, I found financial coaching almost by accident. So I was reading an article about a journalist who was talking about women and money. And she was talking about things like the gender pay gap, the gender poverty gap, etc. And she talked about how she'd gone to see a financial coach. And I'd never heard of this term. So I read the article, was really interested in, and then I actually Googled the person that she went to see. And that's kind of where it all started. So I looked at their website, was really interested in what they were doing. And it seemed to kind of combine my interest in, education and teaching with the knowledge I'd gained through working in financial services. So it kind of felt like the perfect combination. And so I ended up training last June, as I said, And then here we are today.
And that's kind of how we met, the financial
it is.
coaching training, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so many good things have come out of that. So you've now landed on financial education and coaching. Could you tell us a bit more about your business and its mission?
Sure. So the business aims to help people become money confident. And by that, I mean talking about money confidently, thinking about money and making decisions confidently, and making and understanding, I guess, how people can make the most of what they have. And actually, in addition to that, to know where to look for, who to ask if they don't have all of the answers. Because I think some people maybe think that they should know more than they do. And actually, nobody knows it all. And so it's just about making sure that helping people to have the confidence with their money decisions. And I guess in addition to that, it's kind of what I want to do with my business is not to tell people what they should be doing. Everyone is really different. Everyone has different motivations and reasons why they might do something or not do something. So what I really want to do is provide a safe space for people to come and chat and ask questions and, not feel silly. There's so many people who say, it's probably a silly question, but, and I'm like, no question is a silly question, because this is something that you probably have never really been taught. So ask away. And my aim is to get everybody to feel really confident that they've increased their knowledge and they can then take that and make decisions that work well for them and their family and ultimately for their lives.
I absolutely love that. And, money confidence is an issue that I had to deal with for a very long time for so many reasons. But one of the big reasons is I felt I didn't have the language or the right words to say when I was having this money conversation, because that conversation is not a conversation I heard or used to have when I was growing up. So, and we pick up a lot of things from a really young age. So I'd love to know, in your experience, how you would say that the absence of the money conversation at a young age has impacted the way some adults manage and feel about money.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I'm quite pleased, actually, that you said the word some adults, because we all think and feel differently about money. No two people are going to have exactly the same experience or deal with money or how they manage money in exactly the same way. So I think it's right to acknowledge that things can impact some people that might not impact others. But that being said, I think if you've never had a conversation about something when you were younger, and then you're put in a position where you then have to deal with it, work with it, or manage it, there's likely to be a bit more of a challenge there, because ultimately, there's that saying, you don't know what you don't know. So if you've grown up as a child and you've never had to think about paying bills or paying rent or the mortgage or how things work or how you pay for things, and then, for example, you leave home and then you go and start living on your own or living in a house share or whatever, suddenly you're going from never having thought about or managed anything to a situation where you then have to do it all. So I think that if there hasn't been any sort of conversation about money or money related things when you're younger, it can definitely prove a bit more challenging. And I remember speaking to one young person, it was a guy who was 18, and he was actually saying that he was quite shocked to learn that his salary wasn't all his own. And I kind of probed a bit more, and he said that he'd just assumed that the salary that was quoted in a job advert, he would get it all. And he hadn't even thought that there would be some deductions for tax and for national insurance. And it's things like that why would people know about that if we've never told them or we've never shown them? Now, I'm not suggesting that we sit every child down and make them watch their budget and make them, understand what the tax bands are for income tax. But I think having conversations where, you can talk about that. You can say, I get my paid from my employer if you're employed, or if you're self-employed, I get money in, but then I don't get to keep it all. I have to pay tax, and tax goes towards X, Y, and Z. Those types of conversations, I think, can be quite useful. Now, obviously, you need to make it age appropriate. So again, somebody who's a bit older might be able to understand that more than somebody who's a bit younger. But I definitely think those types of conversations and introducing some concepts from a really small age can be really useful to help you when you're a bit older.
I couldn't agree more, actually, with that, Funmi. And I think what you've raised there about the tax on your salary, and actually the amount that is advertised in a job advert is not really all your own, is really important. And I think having a conversation with a young person about that at the right time will actually help them choose the right roles for them, and also think about how is this job going to either get me to the next one, but also about what do they want out of the job? What is this going to bring to them financially, and how is it going to help them build their wealth? Sometimes people go into a role not understanding, that maybe 20% of that is going to disappear, and it scars them for life. They feel then that they can't make any financial decisions just because of that mistake. And actually, it should be viewed as a learning curve. It's all about, we're all learning, aren't we?
Absolutely. Look, nobody knows it all. No finance professional knows it all. There's always going to be parts that, when we don't know, we're not an expert on. And that's why I think it's really important to kind of vocalize that, so people know that they can ask questions. In that example that I gave of that young person, I think it's really important that, luckily they realized they kind of didn't get the job and then were surprised at the time. They had the discussion beforehand, which kind of prepared them for it, and actually then made them start thinking about, okay, what is tax for? And actually it's interesting because tax is probably one of the areas of personal finance that I don't feel like we talk about that much. We talk about how to save, how to maybe build a good credit history, and potentially how to invest, what your pension is for, and how you can help it to grow. But we don't generally talk that much about tax. And when we do talk about tax, it's generally not in the most positive light. But actually, I think that understanding that, yes, we pay tax, and then what that then goes towards and what that's for might help people have a slightly different view of it. And if you know it beforehand, if you know that there's going to be an element of tax and any other deductions that are coming off, and you know what your expenses are, you've got two choices, I guess. You either then need to think, okay, well, if I can't cover it with what I've got because of the deductions, then I either need to increase the income or decrease the expenses. But you're a step ahead because you've got that choice, you've got that knowledge, and then it's up to you, I guess, to the extent that you can, to do one of those two things. That's why I think it's really important to not be surprised by things, but to know them in advance and then use that knowledge to then take your next step.
100% well said. I had to learn all of this myself by just walking through and making those decisions and thinking to myself, oh, why is this happening? Talking about complicated things. Most adults in a child's life might not know everything, about tax and all the other stuff that you've mentioned so far. And that sometimes creates a barrier for having that conversation, so it's all well and good for us to be saying we should start talking to children as early as possible, etc. But if an adult feels like they don't know enough to even have that conversation, what would you say to anyone who feels like that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's a bit of a tricky one because as adults, we like to be seen by our children, I guess, as kind of knowing what we're doing, where their safe space, where their security, and maybe we feel like we should have the answers, but we don't have all of the answers. And when it comes to something like finance and money, if you've never been used to talking about it or thinking about it yourself, I can totally see that then trying to have that conversation with your children, you might just feel a bit uneasy about it, I guess. I think what I would say is just, first of all, you don't need to know everything there is about it. Very few people do, as I said before. and that, you're having a conversation with a child, so it needs to be age appropriate. So the likelihood is you don't really need to go into, or depending on their age, but you're not at degree level amount of detail to talk to that child about something. I think it can just be age appropriate. So, for example, what you might speak to a 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old might be quite different to the conversation that you have with someone who's 14, 15, 16. And also, admitting that you don't necessarily have all the answers and saying, well, why don't we learn together? We're really lucky at the moment that we have so many ways of gathering information. We've got the internet, we've got YouTube, we've got podcasts you can listen to, like what we're creating today. You can go on Instagram, you can read books. There's a wealth of information out there. So if there's something you want to talk to your child about, or that your child has raised and you're not confident about it yourself, then there are ways that you can try and get that confidence. And actually, I think it would be really lovely if you can sort of learn things together, because I think then your child will actually also see that when you don't know something, you can find out and you can learn. I think that would be quite a lovely experience to learn something together.
I love that idea of suggesting that, you learn something together with your child, because as you say, there's a lot of conversation that can come from just doing things together, because the child will be seeing things from a different perspective to the adult. And the conversation that you can have just about that can sometimes be the most informative than actually reading a book or going into onto a course which is very kind of generic, because you can really learn how to manage money your way. And I think that's the problem that people have, that they're looking for the right way to do things with their money, and the right way is your way, as long as you're comfortable with it and it brings you joy, in my opinion, at least.
I completely agree with that. I think there are maybe some basic concepts that might apply to everybody. So, for example, it's a good idea to spend less than you earn, because then you'll have a little, to spend, for it either to be the same or to spend less, so you've got a little bit of a buffer. That kind of applies to everybody. But then there are some things that you can sort of tailor towards you. So there's some approaches, for example, when you're looking at something like budgeting or a spending plan or whatever it is you call it, there are some methods. So, for example, there's this method, I think it's called the 50, 30, 20 method, where people say allocate 50% of your income to your needs, 30% to, I think it's your wants, and then 20% to saving or whatever. Now, that's quite a rigid structure, and that might not work for everybody. So, things like that, I would say, don't get so focused on that. The bigger picture is try and have more coming in than going out, and then tailor that to work for you. And on a day-to-day basis, in terms of things that you can do with your children, like everyday things, shopping is a really good example of how you can have those conversations with your children. You can do things with them without it being let's sit down because now we're going to talk about money. So, just things like making a list before you go shopping. Like if they see you making a list and say to them, okay, what things do we need to buy? Or what meals do we want to eat this week? And what do we need to buy? And they see you making that list, or they help you make that list. And then you go to the shops together, if that's something you want to do, or you go online and do your online shopping. That might be something that, if the child is a bit older, you could say to them, right, here's the list, do the online shopping, and then we'll look at obviously before they press buy, you might want to double check it. But yeah, it might be that you set them a budget and see if they can get it within that, or you say do the shopping and then let's look at see how much that costs. There's ways in which you can incorporate these types of discussions into perhaps everyday things. Buying gifts. I mean, we're at Christmas time now, so people are buying presents for people. This is probably a great time to have a conversation with a child. Maybe they can buy the present for grandma, and the price is set at whatever it's set at. So then you tell them, okay, you're in charge. I think it's really good to give kids a little bit of responsibility. You're in charge. Let's find something for grandma that fits within the budget of X. And that's, you're teaching them then to think about budgets and spending limits, but you're not saying, I'm now going to sit down and we're now going to talk about budgets and spending limits. So I do think there's lots of ways. We just need to think a bit more creatively about how we can incorporate these types of lessons and conversations into our everyday.
Yeah, I agree. And, those examples are so great because you're not actually having that conversation and sitting down on a chair and, it's like this lesson style lecture type thing. It's actually very practical. The practical is so, so, so important. So I love those examples. Thank you for sharing those. When would you say that adults should start having the money conversation with young people?
Because I am in favor of kind of incorporating it into sort of your everyday life, I would say as soon as possible. So when you're talking to them, as soon as they can talk, I mean, it's got to be age appropriate. And a lot of the time you can do these things through play. So for example, I've got a toddler and she's got a pretend shop. And it's quite funny actually, because it came with a little, like a cash register, like a toy cash register. And it's got a card that goes with it. And then you can swipe the card. So it's obviously a little bit old fashioned because we don't swipe cards anymore. It's all about, the contactless and the tapping. So I clearly got her an old version. But, we were playing with that when she was 2. So we have that whole, she gives me a plastic banana. I give her a piece of paper or some coins. It's play, but we're still kind of learning that, there's a value exchange to things. And she's, at the time we started doing that, she was really, really young. Children start to sort of develop their habits and behaviours around lots of things, including money, from quite a young age. The research shows that it's from when they're about 7 or so. So actually, if we start having these conversations, or if we start incorporating these types of concepts and things into our day to day from when they're, really young, 2, 3, 4, then hopefully by the time they reach 7, if it's going to then be set by that point, we've hopefully helped to help them have really positive behaviours and habits. So I would say as soon as possible. But I think it's got to be age appropriate. So I'm not suggesting you sit down a 5-year-old with the Financial Times and start talking about investing, but you might look at a company that a toy that they have, and you can maybe look at that company and look at the price. I mean, it really just depends on the child. Your child the best. What will work and what will sort of stick and what won't. So I think just try different things. But I guess the main thing is just to kind of keep the conversation going. I guess one thing I would say is I think things are a little bit trickier now that payments are less physical. You're no longer really exchanging sort of notes and coins as much as you were sort of 5-10 years ago. And a lot of payments now are digital, so there's a lot of contactless tapping. So I wonder if that, from a child's perspective, that makes it more difficult to understand about money, because you're not really exchanging one thing for another. They're not sort of seeing the coins or the notes, they're just seeing you tap something. So in that instance, maybe it's about discussing what it means when they tap, that there's money that you've got in a bank account and the card is linked to the bank account, if it's a debit card, for example. And when you tap, what then happens is the money from your bank account then goes to the retailer. So you can have those discussions as well. I guess you just got to tailor things a little bit, because the way in which we spend and the way in which we pay for things has evolved, and I guess will keep evolving over time.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I remember when I was trying to teach my daughter, who's now in her 20s, just simple things about money. Back then, because she's in her 20s now, back then we were using cash quite a lot, and it was chip and pin. You had to put in your PIN number to make a card payment. But, I actually took her to the bank, opened a bank account for her. And when she got money, I would actually give her the money to go and deposit in the bank. It seemed like such a very simple thing, but actually it made her understand that, you can get money. You don't have to spend it straight away. You can actually put it somewhere where it can sit and you can make decisions about what you want to do with it. But even just the thing of going into the bank for some people is quite daunting because they've never done it. And I remember my first time when I had to go into a bank, I went in by myself and I was like, I didn't even know what to do.
I think that's such a great idea, actually, that you were able to take your daughter into the bank and open up a bank account with her, because I'm presuming then she got some sort of a passbook or something where you can then start to see, you can see the money that's there maybe, or she then knows that she's got something and that thing is actually hers. And I think there's definitely something really good about giving children something that is theirs, that they can take responsibility for. I also think that doing things visually is really great. So I've got friends and family that do, it's kind of like a physical version of a savings pot. So they might have different jars, clear jars where actual physical cash goes in. I know we're saying that it's less used nowadays, but it's still around. So it might be that when you get some money, there are different places where you can put it. So there might be one jar that's the spend jar. So you might put 50% of it in that, for example. I'm just making up the figures here. Then there might be a save jar. So you save a bit of that. And then there might be a gift jar or a giving jar. So then you might put a bit in that. So then you can visually see money in your different pots, but you've kind of mentally and also physically allocated them to different things. So I think that's quite a great way because you can actually physically see it. If someone's got a bank account, so if a child does have a bank account, if they've got online banking, maybe you log on once a week, once a month, whatever, and you have a look, and has there been any interest? And if there hasn't, then, could there maybe be another one that they could swap to that will give them interest? And then they start to learn that if you put money here, then, you get interest. You might not want to call it interest, you might want to call it your reward, because interest is a reward, isn't it, for having money somewhere. And then they can see that the longer they keep something in there, hopefully the more interest they'll get. I also think that, and I had a job from when I was about 15. I think having a job is a really, really great way of starting to understand a little bit about money. Because I think sometimes it's not that relatable to you. Like if you're doing all these little exercises, you don't really have you might not necessarily have the bigger context, but actually when you then start to work and you're then being paid your hourly rate or whatever it is, and you get your pay slip, I think then you really start to understand the value of money. Because previously, when you weren't working for it, you might have thought you might not have really understood what £50 was or what £10 was or whatever. When you've put your time and effort into work for it, then I think you're really going to start to understand the value of money. I guess that goes back to your practical point. There's no point teaching people about money if it's all really abstract and it's not really relatable. So I think one of the most relatable ways, which obviously will only apply for people who can do this when you're the right age, but is to get a job.
100%. Because you mentioned earlier on that, young people are let out into the world not really understanding the simple things about money, paying bills and whatever. And it's not just people who come from an average family or a poor background, even those from wealthy families, because everything has just been done for them. So not understanding, like, even if everything's been done for you, what has had to be done for that money to be there, whether it's through someone working as an employee for a company or someone building a business, which has been able to create the lifestyle that you've lived so far and funded. That bit of information is really, really important because, yes, you can go to university, come out with a degree, but you still won't know much about how to manage the money that you'll be receiving when you get employed, simply because that conversation when you're young, explaining how this lifestyle that you have has come about, where the money has come from, just hasn't been had. We all learn differently. So it's really important to understand that some children can conceptualize very quickly and others take time. So the practical thing, I love the jars that you talked about. That is, it's visual. It's, you can feel as well, so many senses. You can hear the money going in the jars as well. And then you can step aside and theorize about what am I going to do with the money. So that is a very, it's something people have been doing for decades.
No, I agree. And it's funny because my brother and my sister-in-law, they do this. And remember, I went to their house once and there were these clear jars above the kitchen sink. And I was like, what are they? And they were doing it for their children. And actually, one of my nieces, when she turned 17, she actually bought a moped, and she actually paid for that moped from her money that she had been saving from when she was really small. So obviously this wasn't the money in the jar, because that would be a very big jar, but they transferred from the jar to a bank account for her. She was so proud that she bought her own moped when she was 17. And I said, how do you do it? She was like, oh, it's from my big girl fund. And she'd given it a name. That was her money that she'd been saving all those years. She called her big girl fund. And then when she was a big girl, she bought herself a moped, which I think is just brilliant.
Oh, I absolutely love that. Well, good for her. A lot of discipline there, saving and keeping it for all those years. Well done to her. Now, Funmi, through your business, how are you encouraging more money conversations with young people?
Yeah, so I try and I'm lucky that I've got a big family, so I have conversations within my family. Within my own immediate family, with my daughter, and we play games and we talk as much as I can with a toddler about about money. Talk within my sort of wider family as well. I guess outside of that, I used to I don't do it anymore, but I used to volunteer with a charity called the Money Charity, and we used to go into schools and run money lessons, which were just great because you then get to talk to children and listen to their questions, and the things they wanted to ask you about were probably things that you wouldn't even really think about. It was great to kind of hear their take on things and hear their perspective. And then for the past few years, I've worked with a local youth organisation, and I've run sort of money workshops, but then also workshops where we talk about how to run and how to build and run a business, because money is not just about personal finance. There's the wider context as well. So I continue to support that organisation because I think it's great. And I'm also in talks with a local secondary school about putting together some bespoke financial education workshops for their students. But all secondary schools that follow the national curriculum within England, there should be personal finance lessons in maths and also as part of citizenship. Now, I say this to a lot of parents and they say, I'm pretty sure my child doesn't have any sort of personal finance lessons. Now, what I would suggest is if that's something that parents are interested in, they should speak to their schools about it, because it is on the national curriculum in England. But two things, not all schools follow the national curriculum. So if you're an academy, and lots of schools are becoming academies now, you don't have to follow the national curriculum. And the second thing is, I don't believe that when Ofsted come around and do their inspections, they're not looking for evidence. I don't believe they're looking for evidence of this. So if you think about all the things that schools have to do and how they prioritize, it's probably unsurprising that they focus on things that will be, I guess, assessed from an Ofsted perspective. So it's there on the national curriculum. So if your child goes to a secondary school in England that follows the national curriculum, they should be learning about personal finance within maths and citizenship. So ask about it.
I actually didn't know that about the national curriculum. So that is news to me. And thank you for sharing that. Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. It's been great having you. And I know we've just touched the tip of the iceberg when it comes to money conversations with children. Now, as you know, I believe that to create true wealth, we must all have a clear idea of what wealth means to us in all areas of our life. So in a few words, could you please tell us what wealth means to you in terms of your physical, mental, spiritual, social, and financial well-being?
Oh, what a question. Okay. So from a physical perspective, I think it means, for me, it means, I guess, feeling happy and healthy in myself and being grateful as well, acknowledging and being grateful for the things that I'm able to do, that my body is able to do. I definitely am feeling the effects of working from home for the past nearly 2 years. I'm definitely not moving as much as I did before. So I think it's definitely something I probably need to look into improving. But yeah, from a physical perspective, I think it's about feeling happy and healthy in your body and being grateful for what you can do. From a mental perspective, I think it's having time and space for calm and for thinking and relaxing. Personally, I have a tendency to have this ongoing, almost like a ticker-tocker thing. You have this ongoing to-do list in your head. So I think mental well-being for me, it would be to kind of pause that a little bit and just have some time and space for calm. Spiritual well-being. This feels a bit of a tricky one for me. I would say I'm not really very spiritual. I think there's something out there. So I believe in that there's something, but I don't really know what that is or what that looks like. Probably need to think about or look into that one a bit more. Social well-being. I mean, for me, I love spending time with people. So I don't know if you've ever heard of Gary Chapman's love languages. There's 5 different love languages. And whenever I do that test, my one is always quality time. I love spending time. I would choose that over most things. So like if it's a choice of a present or spending time with someone, I would choose the spending time. Well, I say that. I mean, obviously it depends on the present, but the majority of the time I would prefer to spend time with people. That's what I love. I love bouncing off people and being around people. I'm quite a sociable person. So for me, social well-being is being with the people that I love and laughing and talking and just having a lovely time. Financial well-being, being aware of where I'm at and I'm being comfortable with it, managing my day-to-day and having the ability to plan for a future without any sort of, I guess, financial fear. That's what those things mean to me. I'm actually just very conscious of the fact that you said in a few words. I know that was many more than a few words, so apologies.
That was perfect. I loved all of those. I also like quality time. So, I think it's so much more important than any gifts, you can get. So I'm with you on that one, Funmi. How can anyone listening to this podcast episode get in touch with you if they want to learn more about talking to children or even go on one of your courses or coaching programs?
Yeah, so I have an Instagram account. It's at Finance for Me. Or you can email me, which is hello@Finance for Me. My website is launching next year. So use either the Instagram account or the email, and then they'll have links the Instagram account will have a link to get you through to my website. But yeah, if anybody's got any questions, or if they just want to follow me online and just see what I'm talking about in relation to finance, then please do pop over and say hi. I would love to hear from you.
Fantastic. As usual, I will put the links in the show notes so people can get to your Instagram, etc. from there. Funmi, thank you again for agreeing to this interview. You have shared so many great examples and, and concepts with us today. And I'm sure a lot of adults will be using some of those to start having conversations with young people.
Great. Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Connect with me at The Wealth Conversation on Facebook and Instagram so we can continue the discussion. Also, if you're ready to define what wealth truly means to you, then go to thewealthconversation.com and download the Wealth Cornerstones Guide. Until next week, stay focused on becoming the designer of your financial future.